The old man stood up without arguing. Less than an hour later, the President of the United States would interrupt an entire ceremony because of him. At that moment, however, nobody saw anything remarkable. "Sir, that seat is reserved." The words sounded professional enough, but they carried the quiet certainty of a decision already made. The old man looked up from the folding chair. A cool November wind moved through the memorial grounds, stirring hundreds of American flags planted beside the walkways. Guests were arriving from every direction: military families, decorated veterans, elected officials, men and women wearing polished shoes and carefully pressed coats. The old man did not seem to belong among them. His name was Sam Callahan. He was 86 years old. His gray hair showed beneath the faded baseball cap. A weathered green field jacket hung loosely from his shoulders. A worn backpack rested beside his boot. Most people who glanced his way saw only an elderly homeless veteran. Eric Dawson, the security supervisor standing before him, saw the same thing. "I am going to need you to move, sir," Eric said. "This section is reserved for invited guests." Sam looked toward the stage in the distance. Workers were making final preparations beneath a large presidential seal. Then he glanced at the reserved placard attached to the chair. His expression remained composed. "That is interesting," he said evenly, "because someone told me this was exactly where I was supposed to be." Eric glanced down at the clipboard in his hand. The seating chart had been reviewed 3 times that morning. Every guest in the reserved section had a name, a credential, and a designated seat. At least that was how the system was supposed to work. "Do you have an invitation, sir?" he asked. Sam nodded and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. He produced a folded sheet of paper and handed it over. The document was clearly official, but it had seen better days. The edges were worn. Part of the printed barcode had faded. A water stain crossed one corner. Eric studied it for several seconds. "The Presidential Veterans Recognition Ceremony. Front row guest." The words were there, but enough details had deteriorated to create doubt. Behind him, more guests were arriving. Staff members moved between rows with radios and schedules. The ceremony was less than 30 minutes away. "I cannot verify this," Eric said at last. Sam accepted the invitation back without protest. All right. The answer caught Eric off guard. Most people would have argued. Most people would have demanded a supervisor. Sam simply folded the paper and returned it to his pocket. There was no frustration in his voice, no attempt to persuade. Around them, a few nearby guests had begun paying attention. Some exchanged uncertain looks. Others quickly returned to their conversations. Nobody wanted to get involved. Eric cleared his throat. "There is seating available near the rear section." Sam nodded once, and slowly rose from the chair. First the backpack, then the cane, finally the man himself. For a brief moment his eyes rested on the reserved seat he was leaving behind. Not with disappointment, not with resentment. More like someone looking at a place connected to a memory nobody else could understand. Then he turned and started walking. The distance to the rear section was only about 30 yards, but it felt longer. Conversations softened as he passed. A few people watched openly, most looked away. The cold wind tugged at the sleeve of his jacket while small American flags lined the walkway like silent witnesses. Through it all, Sam carried himself with a measured steadiness that seemed untouched by embarrassment. Near the middle rows, a woman named Megan Brooks watched the entire exchange. She had attended military ceremonies for years. Her late husband had served in the Marine Corps. Something about the old veteran immediately caught her attention. It was not his clothing. It was not the backpack. It was the way he walked, the way he held himself, the way he accepted being moved without surrendering an ounce of dignity. As Sam settled into a folding chair near the rear fence, Megan found herself looking back toward the empty seat he had left behind. For reasons she could not yet explain, she had the distinct feeling that a mistake had just been made. Megan had attended enough military ceremonies to recognize certain things. She recognized the confidence of senior officers, the quiet pride of military families, and the unmistakable bearing of people who had spent years serving something larger than themselves. The old veteran near the rear fence carried that same bearing. His jacket was faded, his boots were worn, his backpack looked older than some of the guests filling the front rows. Yet none of those details matched the way he moved. There was discipline in every motion, restraint, purpose, the kind that remained long after a uniform was gone. Most people had already forgotten about him. Megan had not. As the crowd continued to grow, she found herself glancing back toward the rear section again and again. Finally, she stood and made her way through the rows of chairs. The afternoon sunlight reflected off hundreds of small American flags planted around the memorial grounds. Somewhere beyond the stage, a military band was warming up. The low notes drifted through the cool November air. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked. The old veteran looked up and gave a small nod. Not at all. Megan took the empty chair beside him. For a few moments, neither spoke. Around them, camera crews adjusted equipment. Staff members hurried through final preparations. The ceremony seemed to be gathering momentum by the minute, yet the old veteran remained completely unaffected by the rush. "You were supposed to be sitting up front, were you not?" Megan finally asked. A faint expression crossed his face. Not quite amusement, not quite surprise. "Seems that way." You did not argue. No, most people would have. Sam rested both hands on the curved handle of his cane. The young man believed he was doing his job. Megan studied him carefully. There was no bitterness in his voice, no attempt to make himself sound noble. He simply stated the fact as he saw it. That, more than anything, made her curious. As the wind shifted, she noticed something protruding from the breast pocket of his jacket, the corner of an old photograph. The paper had yellowed with age. Sam followed her gaze and carefully removed it. For several seconds he looked at it before handing it over. The photograph showed two young soldiers standing beside a river beneath a cloudy sky. One was clearly Sam many decades earlier. The other stood beside him with an arm across his shoulder. Time had damaged the image. A long crease crossed directly through the second soldier's face, hiding most of his features. "Friend of yours?" Megan asked. Sam's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. The sounds of the ceremony grounds seemed to drift farther away. Somewhere above the city, the distant hum of a helicopter crossed the sky. Something changed in his expression. Not sadness. Memory, deep and enduring. "A long time ago," he said. "We spent a difficult season together." His thumb rested briefly on the crease that concealed the other man's face. Then he looked toward the stage and added, "Funny thing about life. Sometimes the people who matter most end up traveling very different roads." For several moments, neither of them spoke. The photograph rested in Megan's hands, while the sounds of the ceremony drifted across the memorial grounds. A brass instrument carried a low note through the cool air. Flags moved in steady waves above the crowd. Around them, thousands of people were gathering for an event that seemed important. Yet for Sam, the world had narrowed to a single faded photograph. "The river was called Song B," he said at last. His voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. "At least that is what the maps called it." Megan listened without interrupting. Sam's eyes remained fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond the stage, beyond the years themselves. "Back then it looked a mile wide," he continued. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "Funny what age does. Everything looks smaller when you get older, except the memories." A cool gust swept across the grounds, carrying the scent of cut grass and autumn leaves. For a moment the old veteran seemed to drift somewhere far away, not lost, simply visiting a place he had never entirely left. The young man in that picture was a lieutenant, Sam said, fresh out of school, full of questions. He carried a notebook everywhere. Megan glanced down at the damaged photograph. "What kind of questions?" A faint smile appeared. "All kinds. Where I grew up. What my father did for a living. What truck I wanted to buy when I got home. Which baseball team deserved my loyalty." He shook his head slightly. Most of them were not important. Megan smiled. The story did not sound like the beginning of a legend. It sounded like two young men becoming friends. Somehow that made it feel more authentic. "He sounds memorable," she said. He was. Sam nodded. "The thing most people get wrong is they think important moments announce themselves. They do not. Most days feel ordinary while you are living them." His weathered fingers traced the edge of the photograph. "You drink bad coffee. You complain about the weather. You make plans for a future you cannot see yet." His gaze settled once more on the hidden face behind the crease. "Then one day you look back and realize you were standing inside a moment that changed everything." Megan followed his eyes. The damaged photograph suddenly seemed less like a keepsake and more like a missing piece of a much larger story. "What happened to him?" she asked. Sam remained silent for several seconds. Nearby, event staff guided late arrivals into their seats. The ceremony would begin soon. He carefully folded the photograph and held it between his hands. Then he looked toward the stage where workers were making their final preparations beneath the presidential seal. "That," he said, is a much longer story than most people would believe. Sam turned the photograph over and stared at the blank back for a moment. The years had faded nearly everything except the memory attached to it. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, but his attention remained somewhere far away. His name was Michael Harrison, he said. Megan noticed the name immediately, though she could not explain why it sounded familiar. Sam seemed not to notice her reaction. He was already walking through old memories. Back then he was Lieutenant Harrison, 22 years old. Thought every problem had a solution if you worked hard enough. A restrained smile appeared beneath the lines of age on his face. Truth is, he was usually right. The sounds of the ceremony softened as he spoke. He remembered mornings wrapped in fog beside the river. He remembered long conversations that stretched through ordinary days. Not dramatic moments. Not stories that would make headlines. Just two young Americans trying to imagine the lives waiting for them after service ended. Most people think friendships are built during big moments, Sam said. They are not. They are built during ordinary Tuesdays when nothing special happens. Megan nodded. The statement carried the weight of experience. We spent a lot of time talking about what came next, Sam continued. Michael wanted to make a difference. He talked about service constantly, not because he wanted recognition, because he believed people should leave things better than they found them. Sam let out a quiet chuckle. I told him that sounded exhausting. Megan smiled. What did he say? He said maybe I was right. For a moment the years seemed to fall away. Then the expression faded into reflection. Sam looked toward the stage where nearly every seat was now occupied. Life has a way of separating people, he said. One day you see someone every morning. Then years pass. Decades pass. People move. Families grow. Paths divide. His eyes drifted toward the photograph again. Sometimes you wonder whatever happened to them. Megan studied the hidden face beneath the crease. Did you ever see him again? Sam slowly shook his head. No. The answer surprised her. The way he spoke about the man made it sound as though they had remained close. Not once, not once. He carefully returned the photograph to his pocket. Every now and then I would hear his name. A promotion here, a new responsibility there. Then larger things. His gaze settled on the stage once more. This time there was a hint of amusement in his expression. Let us just say young Lieutenant Harrison ended up doing a little better than the hardware store I always imagined for him. Megan followed his line of sight. Her eyes landed on the large presidential seal positioned behind the podium. For the first time, a possibility crossed her mind. Before she could ask another question, an announcement echoed across the memorial grounds. Conversations stopped. People rose from their seats. The ceremony was about to begin. The applause rolled across the memorial grounds as President Michael Harrison stepped onto the stage. Thousands of people rose to their feet. Flags moved above the crowd in measured waves. Cameras followed every step. The president waved, greeted several decorated veterans seated near the front, and took his place behind the podium. From the rear section, Sam watched with a thoughtful expression. Looks like he finally found a job, he said. Megan laughed despite herself. Yet as the ceremony began, she noticed something unusual. President Harrison delivered the opening remarks flawlessly. He honored military families. He thanked veterans. He spoke about service, sacrifice, and responsibility with the confidence expected from the leader of the nation. But every few minutes his attention drifted toward the front row, toward a specific chair, a chair that remained empty. At first nobody else seemed to notice. Then several White House staff members began exchanging glances. One aide checked a seating chart. Another spoke quietly into a radio. Near the reserved section, Eric Dawson noticed the activity and frowned. The empty chair sat exactly where he had left it. The small placard attached to the backrest moved gently in the wind. A few moments later, a senior White House official approached carrying a folder. Who was assigned to Seat 1? He asked. Eric checked his clipboard. An elderly guest. There was a problem with his credentials, so I relocated him. The official stared at him. You relocated him? Yes, sir. For a second, neither man spoke. Then the official opened the folder and looked down at a photograph clipped inside. His expression changed immediately. Where is he now? Something cold settled in Eric's stomach, rear section, near the fence. Without another word, the official turned and hurried away. 2 Secret Service agents followed him. Eric watched them disappear into the crowd. Suddenly, the entire morning replayed itself in his mind. The worn invitation, the calm response, the complete absence of complaint. None of it felt ordinary anymore. On stage, President Harrison reached the middle of his prepared remarks and paused. The silence lasted only a moment, but it was enough. He glanced once more toward the empty front row seat, then toward his chief of staff waiting near the stage steps. Their eyes met. The chief of staff gave a subtle shake of his head. They had not located him yet. The president continued speaking, but Megan could tell his attention was elsewhere. Beneath the polished ceremony, something unexpected was unfolding. Near the rear fence, Sam remained completely unaware. He sat listening to the speech with genuine interest, his hands resting on the curved handle of his cane. Meanwhile, somewhere between the empty chair and the stage, an entire chain of people had begun to realize that the wrong man had been moved. The longer the speech continued, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. President Harrison never lost his composure. Years in public life had taught him how to remain steady under pressure. Yet there were small signs. A glance toward the front row that lasted a second too long. A sentence delivered more slowly than the one before it. A pause that seemed to carry its own question. Most of the audience never noticed. The people closest to him did. Near the stage, the chief of staff moved quickly between aides. Radios carried short updates. Secret Service agents quietly adjusted positions. What had begun as a simple seating question was becoming something far more significant. Seat 1 is still empty. One aide reported. We confirmed the guest checked in this morning. Another staff member handed over a photograph. The chief of staff studied it carefully. The image showed an elderly veteran wearing a faded green jacket. A name was printed beneath it. Samuel Callahan. The realization was immediate. Near the reserved section, Eric Dawson watched the activity with growing concern. Then he saw the photograph for himself. The same man, the same veteran he had moved less than an hour earlier. A weight settled heavily in his chest. He remembered the worn invitation, the composed voice, the complete absence of complaint. For the first time all morning, he wished the old man had argued. It would have been easier to dismiss. On stage, President Harrison reached the end of another prepared paragraph. Then he stopped. The memorial grounds fell silent. A cool wind moved through the flags behind him. He looked toward the empty chair one more time. Finally, the chief of staff returned to the base of the stage. Their eyes met. This time there was no uncertainty. The chief of staff gave a small nod. Then he quietly held up the photograph. The president looked at the image, read the name beneath it, and immediately smiled. Relief crossed his face. The photograph was familiar. The name was unmistakable. Together they removed any remaining doubt. He had found him. Instead of continuing with the speech, Harrison closed the folder containing his prepared remarks. The gesture immediately caught the attention of reporters, camera crews, and guests seated near the front. The president stepped away from the podium and approached the microphone once more. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily across the grounds, "there is someone I need to see before we continue." Confused murmurs spread through the audience. Then President Harrison descended the stage steps. Secret Service agents moved with him, creating space without disturbing the crowd. Row by row, people turned to follow his path. Near the rear fence, Megan saw him approaching first. Her pulse quickened. Beside her, Sam remained seated, unaware that the most powerful man in the country was walking directly toward him. Sam looked up only when Megan suddenly straightened in her chair. At first he assumed something was happening on stage. Then he noticed the expression on her face. Surprise, confusion, disbelief. He followed her gaze. The crowd ahead was slowly parting. People stepped aside without being asked. Conversations faded, heads turned. A narrow path opened through the rows of chairs. At the center of it walked President Michael Harrison. For a moment Sam simply stared. The years seemed to fold inward, not disappear, not completely. Age had left its mark on both men. One carried 86 years of memories. The other carried the responsibilities of an entire nation. Yet beneath those years something familiar remained. Harrison slowed as he approached. Secret Service agents stopped several yards away, allowing the moment to belong to the two men. The president's eyes settled on Sam's face. Then they dropped briefly to the photograph visible inside the veteran's jacket pocket. A genuine smile appeared, not the polished smile used for speeches. Something warmer, something older. "You still carry it," Harrison said. Sam glanced down at the photograph and shook his head. Some habits survive longer than others. The president laughed softly. The sound carried through the silent crowd. "When my staff brought me your check-in photograph, I saw that picture sticking out of your pocket. Then I read your name." He paused briefly. After that, there was no doubt. Understanding spread through Megan immediately. The recognition had not come from memory alone. It came from the photograph and the name together. A bridge connecting the present to a friendship nearly 7 decades old. Sam carefully removed the photograph and handed it over. Harrison accepted it with both hands. For several seconds he studied the faded image. 2 young soldiers beside a river, one face hidden behind a crease that no longer mattered. "I cannot believe you kept this all these years," the president said. "I could say the same thing about you," Sam replied. A ripple of laughter moved through the surrounding crowd. Then Harrison's expression became more serious. He looked around at the thousands of people watching. "There is something everyone here should know," he said. Sam immediately shook his head. "Michael?" "No," the president answered gently. "You have spent enough years letting other people stand in front." The old veteran looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Nearby, Eric Dawson stood frozen among the crowd. Every word felt heavier than the last. He remembered asking Sam to leave. He remembered watching him walk away from the reserved section. Most of all, he remembered how respectfully the old veteran had accepted it. For the first time that day, Eric understood exactly who had shown character and who still had something to learn. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The November wind moved steadily through the rows of flags while thousands of people watched an old veteran and a president standing side by side. Then Michael Harrison turned toward the crowd. "Many years ago," he said, "before any title I have ever held, before Washington, before any of this, I was a young lieutenant trying to figure out what kind of man I wanted to become." His eyes moved toward Sam. "The person who taught me some of the most important lessons of my life is standing right here." The memorial grounds remained silent. "He taught me that leadership begins with respect. He taught me that character matters when nobody is watching. He taught me that service is not something you talk about. It is something you live." Sam lowered his head slightly, clearly wishing the attention would move elsewhere. Harrison smiled. "He is still the same man." A few people laughed quietly. Then the president extended his hand. "Come with me, Sam." The old veteran hesitated for only a moment before accepting it. Together they began walking toward the front section. As they moved through the crowd, people slowly rose from their seats. First a few veterans, then military families, then entire rows. Within moments, thousands were standing. The applause began softly and grew stronger with every step. Near the aisle, Eric Dawson stood motionless. He watched the old man he had relocated earlier pass by. For a brief second, Eric opened his mouth as though he wanted to apologize. Nothing came out. Sam looked at him and offered a small nod. No resentment, no accusation. That simple gesture weighed more heavily than any criticism could have. When they reached the reserved section, Harrison stopped beside the chair marked A1. The same chair that had remained empty throughout the ceremony. The same chair Sam had quietly left behind. "This seat has been waiting for you all day," the president said. Sam looked at it for a moment before sitting down. The applause continued. Harrison returned to the podium and waited until the crowd settled. "A nation is remembered not only by the leaders whose names appear in history books," he said, "but by the ordinary men and women whose quiet sacrifices make those leaders possible." His gaze returned to Sam. "Everything I became started with people like him." The crowd rose once more. Sam simply sat there, hands resting on his cane, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Yet there was peace in his expression, not pride, not triumph, just peace. As the ceremony continued beneath the bright afternoon sky, the empty chair was empty no longer. Neither was the debt it represented. The seat had been waiting all day. In many ways, so had the nation. And as the flags moved above the memorial grounds, thousands of people carried home the same lesson. Sometimes the people a country owes the most are the very ones it is most likely to overlook. Respect is not demanded. It is earned, and when it is finally returned, it arrives with a weight that time cannot diminish.